Well, welcome to another interview segment with Reunion Roadmap. This is Al McCarn. Today, we cross the globe to Woy Woy, Australia, in the neighborhood of Sydney, and get to talk to an old friend who I haven't seen in a long time, Margot Crossing. Margot, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Al. It's nice to see you again after.
Yes.
When were we together? I think 2016. Yeah.
Yes, it was at the second BNAOSF Congress. And I think that's where we want to talk or start, because this is all about the lost tribes of the House of Joseph and their return. You've been doing so much ever since we first met. And it was actually 2015 we met by Zoom, I think, or by Skype.
That's correct. Yeah.
But from long before then, you've been working on what I would say is a divine calling to document the lost tribes, where they went in the East, in Asia and Australia. And now you have an initiative that, we'll get into that. But first of all, you were mentioning something about the second BNAOSF Congress, which happened just after Sukkot in 2016. And you had a God moment, a God story that you wanted to tell. Go ahead and relate that.
Well, I do want to relate the God story, because what we're doing, Al, and many people, and probably most of your listeners, will understand this is a big God story. It's not a side story. It's the central story of what he's trying to do, in these last days, and or at the end of this age, I should say. But what I wanted to mention is because you and I met each other, and I was staying at Ephraim and Ramona's house in Benjamina, I think, in Israel. And then, then I came to the conference. But what had happened prior to that was I had lived in and out of Mizoram in northeast India since 2007. And prior to that, I'd prayed for the place for every day for 9 years prior to that, before I went there, and, an amazing ministry opened up. But I ended up staying at the house of the researcher there, the lady who'd done all the research. And at one point, I think about 2014, I took her to Thailand because she wanted to go to Thailand to see the other hill tribe people. And so I was able to, one of my colleagues took her to Bangkok. I met them at the airport and took her up. We were able to find so many things that the hill tribe, people had in Thailand that were the same as the hill tribe people in northeast India had. They were weaving, their baskets, even their grandfather and grandfather's names. And so she was able to document that because, she understood. And then I flew back home with her, because she was an elderly lady, and I flew back home to Mizoram with her, and I'm staying at her house. And she comes to my bedroom door, and she knocks on the door, and she says, would you like to read these two books? And so I said, no, thanks. And so she leaves, and she lives at the other side of a very big house. And as soon as she's gone, the Holy Spirit says to me, yes, you do. And so off I go, and to the other side of the house, knock on her door, and I go, yes, I've decided I will read those books. And so the upshot of, I'm reading Rabbi Avakale book. So I think it's Rabbi Elihalu Avakale, probably, just mashed his name. And he was the founder of Amashav, and he'd gone all over the Eastern Hemisphere looking for lost tribes some decades back. And you might know Across the Sabbath River by Hillel Halkin. So Hillel Halkin traveled with him. Anyway, so what happened was, I'm reading his book, and in the footnotes it references Reverend Torrance, who was a missionary in the early 1900s in southwest China. And I went, oh my goodness, I should get this book. So I rang up Princeton Theological College in your country, and sure enough, they had the book. And for, I think, $17, they Xeroxed it and posted it to me. And I went, wow, I have the book, which is really fantastic. And then I realized that there was just this man, Reverend Torrance, had documented the Israelites in this part of China to the point that they actually have a Moses staff with a snake wrapped around it. It's stunning what's there in that part of in that country. anyway, so I decided to take this lady and her daughter with me to China, and that's what I was doing on the back of the second B'nai Yosef Congress. Because I remember Ramona saying to me, she was trying to get me to turn up at the conference earlier than I could. I had a hard finish in Australia for some reason, can't remember what. But because I was going back through China, I had to fly, Sydney, Hong Kong. It was Yunnan province. I can't remember the name of the city there. And then I had to fly from there to Kolkata, from there to Delhi to Uzbekistan to Tel Aviv. So it was a long flight. And she said, "Can't you go?" She said, "What if you go the other way around?" I said, "Ramona, you have no idea where Australia is, do you?" It's just, we're just a long way away from everywhere. Everywhere is a long way away from us. And I said, even the other side of the country is a long way away from us. Anyway, so I arrived about 2 hours late for the Congress, and I got most of the Congress, and it was really fun. And then I got back on the plane, took a lady from the United States back to Mizoram, and she was going to be teaching Hebrew to the theological college over there. So she'd heard my interview, I don't know, maybe with you, I think.
That might have been. That was, I think, 2015 when we had the interview with Hebrew Nation Radio back when I was.
And I think she'd listened to that and then contacted me. I think that's what had happened. And so she was very interested. She knew something from over here. And so I said, well, so what do you do? She said, "I'm a linguistics master, and I teach Hebrew." And I said, "Okay, I'll get a job for you," which is what I did, and all volunteer. But but the college gave her a board and keep and whatever. And so then I picked up the researcher, my friend Zaitang Chuni and her daughter, and then I flew over to Yunnan province and then into Chengdu, where I met one of my friends, to try and find these hill tribe people in southwest China. And so what was really interesting about that is that I'd contact a lady in the UK, and she was doing research on these people. They're called the Chiang Min, from there, the Chiang from the Min River Valley. And so she'd done a research paper on it, and then I published a research paper on academia.org so we could talk to each other, because that's how you had to do it back in those days. And she said, "Well, you should meet Esther Chen if you're going to Chengdu." Well, lo and behold, my friend in Aizawl, Mizoram, on the Burmese border with Thailand, with India, somebody turned up to her house and said, "Oh, you're going to Chengdu, you must meet Esther Chen." Okay. And so I desperately needed a translator, because I never need a translator in India. India speaks English. Everywhere somebody speaks English. But in China, that's not the case. And so I'd been asking God for a translator, and I was down visiting some friends, on behalf of another friend. And the wife was Chinese, and she leans across the table this particular day and she says, "Oh, so you're going to China. What dates are you going?" I tell her. And she says, "Would you like a translator?" And I go, "Well, yes, I would." She said, "Well, we're in China," because her and her husband went to China regularly. They were, they had a ministry over there, and they had those dates free. And so what was the amazing thing was, when they turned up in Chengdu from another part of China, they had Esther Chen's phone number. So suddenly I had this contact with Esther Chen, and we went out and we met her, and I said to her, "Would you be able to take me up to the hills, to show me this people group and whatever?" And so and I had a budget to do that, and I said, "I'll pay for everybody. I've got you organize the cars, I'll pay for the cars, I'll pay for the accommodation. I had a budget to do that." So I now had 6 people in my team. She had her and her husband, and probably a couple other people, and off we went in these 2 cars, and we went up to the hills, and we ended up picking up some Israelis who were backpacking up in there as well, which ended up being quite strategic, because when we went to some of the villages, some of the names in the villages were Hebrew. like the village was called Gedi, and it had, instead of having plaster, they would plaster their walls, and then they would paint or carve sheep on the walls, except for this village where they painted or plastered goats all over their walls. And the village was called Gedi, which is Hebrew for goat. So En Gedi means the village of the goat. Anyway, so, and we literally get to this, we're walking up these streets, and one of the streets is called Yahweh, like literally called Yahweh. I'm just like, it was stunning, some of the stuff. And so that was just a precursor. And then we finally got to the live tribal museum. So, when I say tribal museum, like live, it was all the different hill tribe people in their costumes doing their traditional cultural thing for the public who were paying money to get into the museum. And that was a daily occurrence. And the Chinese government had set that up on the wake of the 2008 earthquake, because that part of China had been so devastated that there was an outcry from all the Chinese population that the central government should do something for those people. And this is what they did. They set up this tribal museum, and, so it kept their culture alive. And so, so I've got my friend from Northeast India there, and we're going through, they were literally playing this game. And she said to them, we play this game back home. It was like a tug of war, except it was a pole. Instead of pulling, you pushed. And you had to push your opponents over. And so it was a hilarious moment where she was 73 and I'm, late 50s probably. And, and lo and behold, I'm the one on my backside in the snow. And she thought it was very funny. And then we went up into the main part of the museum, and she, was like, yes, we have this. She took pictures of everything. And, it was really great for her to see that this is probably where their people had originated from. And so they knew they'd come from that area of China somewhere, but here it was, this people that had Israelite documentation from this missionary having the same cultural things as her culture. So she was able to tie the whole thing together into her culture. So now we've got a people group that are, documented to be Israelite, and documented to be the same people group as her people, and they of course say that they're Israelite. So now you've got connecting evidence. It's not just a prophecy that one of their prophets had. It's not just the fact that all of their old people said, oh, we're sons of Manasseh, which is, which they do. But now we've got corroborating evidence in a close geographic part of the world, which is not their group. It's a connecting group. And so that's what I really love about it. Now, the interesting thing about Esther Chen was she said, well, I can only give you 2 days because I have to come back because I'm putting a 3-day conference on in Chengdu. And by the way, would you like to come? So I said, well, I asked the question, what's the conference on? And so she says, the lost tribes of Israel in China. I have literally decided to go to this city at this time in history, it was November, straight after your conference. So it was November 2016. Yep.
Yeah.
And here it is. She has organized and planned some time back to have this conference where people from all over China came to talk about their stories, about their relations to being part of the tribes of Israel. So there was people from Inner Mongolia, there was people from everywhere. And, and when we were giving our testimonies at the end of the first day's conference, this man stood up and gave his testimony. So it's all translated. So he's speaking Chinese and, somebody's interpreting it for us. And I realized this is the other name that Rachel Meeking from the UK had given me. She said, there's a Mr. Damon Wu who has translated all of Reverend Torrance's works from the 1920s into Chinese and had a whole presentation in the Chengdu Museum, which Torrance had actually originally had set up. And so this was the first time ever that the Chinese Communist Party had honored a Western missionary, and that was because he'd started this big museum in Chengdu. But he'd also documented all the Israeliteness of these hill tribe people around the Min Valley. And so she had given me, or she had said, you should meet him because he's trying to go to Mizoram in northeast India, and he hasn't been able to get a visa. And so he gets up and gives his testimony, and I go, oh my God, it's the man I've sent 100 emails to who hasn't replied to me. And here he is sitting next to me at this conference. And he's from the East Coast. It's not like he was from Chengdu. And so he says, I didn't want to come to the conference. I didn't want to come to the conference. And then the Holy Spirit said to me, you must go to that conference. And so I got my son. So I spent the last 3 days on a train, and here I am. And so then it was my turn to give, how I got there, which was really, I thought I should go to Chengdu. I decided November would be a good time, and so here I am. It was just all, it was really God, because, I can't make stuff like that happen. And I said, and if you had got to Mizoram, everybody in Mizoram would say, there's one person you need to talk to, and that's Zaitang Chuni. And I said, and that's the lady standing next to me. And so we've come to you. You haven't had to come to us. And, and literally this old lady friend of mine and him, they got up in this conference that they didn't know each other, couldn't speak a word of each other's language, and they just danced around the room. It was just, I've got pictures of it, just really, really beautiful. And so, I mean, he's come to Australia now. I've met him again, and he's trying to go to Japan at the moment and to extend some of his research over there. But, the stuff that he's doing, the stuff that, with this research, is just stunning. And I just want the audience who's listening to really understand that, I'm just a housewife. I live in a very small place just north of Sydney. I grew up in a country town in Australia, and, and for me to do some of the things that I'm doing in regards to this topic could not possibly happen unless God really wanted it to happen. So, that's the end of that story.
It's quite a story. The things that you have uncovered, and we might want to mention your blog at the moment. What's the name of the blog, and where do people find it?
Okay, my blog is Lost Tribes Found blog at wordpress.com. I also have a Rumble channel now, which has videos from a conference back in, I think it was 2015. And so that's Lost Tribes Found on Rumble. My academic work, I've got a couple of papers, academia.org, and just put Margot with a T Crossing in. You'll find I've got 2 papers. There's 3 on the thing, but one of them's just been posted twice because I'm technically illiterate, so they just got uploaded twice. And I can't seem to take one of them down because there's too many comments on it, on both of them. But the third one is a talk that I did in Kyrgyzstan in 2019. So it's a scientific symposium. I'm pretty sure I was the only non-academic speaking at the symposium. There was professors from all over Eastern Europe, all through Tajikistan, Central Asia, into there. And my topic was the peoples of the Lost Book, connecting Northeast India to Central Asia, to Central Asian migration through oral history, because the topic of the scientific symposium was oral history, myth and legend. So, and that's because the people in Kyrgyzstan have an epic, I guess, like is it Homer's epic, the Epic of Gilead or something? But their epic is called the Epic of Manas, and so it takes teams of chanters. I think 7 days, 24 hours for the 7 days to get through this epic. It's epic, and it's and it has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of references to biblical Israel in it. And so when I took 3 Mizos from Northeast India to this scientific symposium with it, because it also had a cultural event, and they were part of the cultural event. And while we were being interviewed for a documentary, the cameraman and the art director were having a discussion with each other about where the camera was going to go, the lighting, the curtains in the unit that we were in, and blah blah blah. And one of them said, "Doctor," which is a Kyrgyz phrase which means stop fussing. Well, the three Mizos stood up because they went, oh my goodness, this is a Mizo phrase that means stop fussing.
That's one of the amazing things with the linguistic connections.
Mm.
You know, 20 years ago, when I first became aware of my own Hebraic identity, can't trace it through DNA or anything else, but I'm reading Yair Davidi, who's much of his research has been on where the tribes went to the west. Well,
that's correct.
that's where my people went.
Yep.
I know,
mine.
and yours too. Yes.
Yeah.
So I know the Scots and the Irish and the English and the Welsh. That's us. They had roots coming by multiple directions. And tracing it, Davidi, this opened my eyes, tracing this by linguistic elements and place names and cultural similarities. Well, that helped me understand the Western migrations. You're doing the same thing with the Eastern migrations. Well, so many things fascinate me, Margot, but the conference in Chengdu, in the middle of nowhere in Western China, and they're gathered to talk about the lost tribes in China. My first question is, how could the government of China permit this to happen?
Well, it wasn't a big conference. They just hired a small conference hall in a hotel, and that was how it was happening. And the people attending were word of mouth, which is why the question at the end of the first day was, how did you get here? How did you know about it? Because it wasn't advertised, of course. And different cities in China have different levels of authoritarianism as well. For example, when I was in Xi'an, because I went to Xi'an, and people will know that that's the place of the Terror Corridor warriors. Okay, and it's a place on, like when you're coming across the Silk Road, Xi'an's one of those places that you end up. And so it was the capital at some stage. And so when I was there, I was picked up by a Christian called Noah. We were very openly talking Christian stuff all over the place. It was just like, nobody, he didn't care, none of the authorities in Jet. But then I got on the train and I went to Lanzhou, which is further west. And I was picked up by the sister and the wife of a pastor early in the morning from the train, taken to a hotel room where the pastor turned up later in the day and talked to us in the hotel room and then left so that nobody knew he'd come to see us. So he had to be a lot more careful in that city than, just the city that I'd been in literally the day before. So it's, it's often the local authorities that are, expanding, the different laws. I mean, I'm sure there's a central government law for whatever, but how it's outworked, I think, is different from province to province. So anyway, that's what we was able to do in Chengdu. So yeah.
And of course, my question is not just because of the anti-Christian policies of the Chinese Communist Party, but also the anti-minority policies with one China, and there's the persecution and the cultural oppression of anyone who's not of the majority.
And it's become, because my friends I said that I had friends that came and translated. So her husband is he's actually got a Jewish background. So he's a Christian from Australia, so part Scottish, part Jewish. So and she was brought up in China inside the Chinese communist regime before coming to us. So they're both believers and and have been doing. But they have noticed in the last, was pre-COVID, I think. They noticed the harshness of the young people that are in charge now, like the older people, that they seem to get a pass from. They'd actually started a drug rehab thing over there, and so the senior government leaders were very were very friendly to them because of the work that they were doing, and it was really helping China to get people off, the young people off drugs. Well, the younger generation that's come up now is very, very anti-Western, and my friend he said the last time he was over there it was very difficult, and so they'd been going there for decades. And so some of the stuff that was happening now is, like, I have no intention of going to China anytime soon either. But between the Olympic Games in 2008, I think it was, and about 2016, there just seemed to be a period of that things were lax, and you could go there and and not, well, it seemed like you weren't being bothered that much, and so
Yes.
that's the answer to that question. Yeah.
Well, it does, but it does get to some of the history that you have mentioned, and I'd like to address this one. The lost books. And there's this story from 2,000 years ago. I wouldn't know which dynasty it was in China, but the Emperor Qin Shi Huang, who burned the book.
Mm.
How does that relate to these stories of the lost tribes and the cultural memory? Because you relate that in your paper that you presented in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. But could you just relate that? Because there's something interesting that resonated with me.
So I lived in Thailand amongst the Karen for a while, and the Karen have a story that. So I don't know if you realise that in the early 1800s, missionaries from, pretty sure from the United States went there, probably Baptist. There was Dr. and Mrs. Mason. They were the ones in northern Myanmar. So, because there was no borders back then, it was sort of all East India, that sort of region. But they'd gone up from Rangdu up the rivers into visit these the Karen. Okay, and so they related back to the missionary organizations that they thought they'd found an Israelite group there. Like they literally, they literally talk about that. There's probably a quote somewhere. I can send you the quote if you need to, or people can go on my blog. They'll find the quote. It'll be on one of my blogs. But the reason that the Karen became Christian in numbers up to 95%. So, this was this huge, I don't know if you want to call it a revival, but village after village after village after village of Karen, finding, Jesus Christ, as they would have been taught, and the reason is because they had a prophecy that they had lost their book and that a younger white brother would turn up with the book. Okay. And so when these white people turned up with the Bible, and the stories were similar, and the culture of the book was similar, they went, this is our lost book. Okay. And so this is how their lost book story goes. Okay. They had a golden book and they neglected it. So while they were burning the fields off, trying to get ready for the paddy fields and whatever, because they burn off, slash and burn, that they left the book on a log, a smouldering log, and it got burnt. Okay. Now they managed to save some of it. So they had some pages, some pieces of this book. And then the story went, and then they neglected it further, and it fell through the bamboo floors of their huts, and then the chickens and pigs ate it. And so that's their story. Now, the interesting thing about the Karen is they have a running calendar, and they literally date themselves to the year 749 BC. And they come from a land called Tibi-Kobe, which some people think is the land of Tibet and the Gobi Desert. Okay, so that would place them up in that northwestern region of China. But it also asks the question, is the book the Torah? And have they dated themselves from the first captivity that the Assyrians took the northern, those 2.5 tribes into captivity on? Because that's supposed to be, what is it, 739 BC, not 749 BC. So it's the year after the first captivity, which we say is 740 BC. Sorry about getting the dates wrong. But it's literally the year after. So they sort of like they go into captivity and then they start counting the years from then. And so somehow they get through Central Asia, they get through Western China, and then they end up in northern Myanmar, and with this story that they lost their golden book. Okay, so that's their story. Now, there's a Christian anthropologist called Don Richardson, and it's a book that you can get readily. It's called Eternity in Their Hearts. Now, if you read chapter 2, he documents 10, and this is just coincidence that it's 10, but he documents 10 hill tribe people in that region, northeast India, northern Myanmar, and western Thailand, that all have similar traits in that they had a book that got lost, they have a name for a one true creator God, and and then there's just various myths and stuff that go around that. So the Mizos, which is where I've been living on and off, and now I have 2 Mizo grandchildren, so this is how closely related I am to this tribe. Their story is they were building a great wall, a big wall. No, I'm not going to call it a great wall. They were building a big wall. That's their words. And then they escaped through the big wall. There was a hole in the big wall, and some of them escaped, some of them didn't. After that, they lived in caves, and so they call themselves the Chinlung, which translates the cave dwellers. And so they know they came from China somehow. So they're now in India, but northeast India, but they don't think that's where they came from. They think they came from China. And they have also a story that a dog ate their book. So they've now got an animal eating their book as well. So they lost their book and an animal ate their book. Now, Pizai Tungchuni, who's the researcher, my friend, she says that to call somebody a dog in Mizoram is a derogatory term. And so she thought that it was this emperor, what is it, Qing Shi Huang.
Qing Shi Huang, yeah.
And so that's well documented that he actually took all the books in China except for, I think, his philosophy and agriculture, and burnt all of them. He burnt all the books. It wasn't just the Torah. He burnt all the books. And so that was 213 BC. So here you've got all these people down in, southwestern China, bleeding into Myanmar, all with a lost book story. Now, the interesting thing about that is because the people in the Chiang in the Min Valley, when Reverend Torrance was following one of their ancient rituals, which he could see, which was a Day of Atonement-like ritual. So he'd been invited in as a guest into this ritual, and the priest is actually showing him what you would do in this ritual. And so he realized it's a Day of Atonement-like ritual. And so he reads, because by this stage he's obviously understanding their language. He reads the 16th chapter of Leviticus to this priest, and the priest realizes, and this is what he jumps up and he exclaims, "These are our lost scriptures." So they had a lost book as well, even though they hadn't talked about it. So when the Torah was presented to them, the 16th chapter of Leviticus, which is about the Day of Atonement, he immediately recognized that was why they were keeping these rituals alive. Mm-hmm. And then Torrance says, because this is being related by his son, who became a famous bishop, and a famous theologian. And so then his son relates, because he was a small boy, he was there at the time. He says, and then my father turned to the first chapter of the book of John and read about the Lamb of God who came to take away the sin of the world. And then he said, this priest and his entire family were believed and baptized. These are biblical stories, Yes. But here was this people group, and a priestly classes people group were keeping alive these rituals because one day it was going to be important. And then,
Yes. Yeah. And just to mention, because many of our audience is North American, and we're aware over here of the Native American tribes with similar stories, similar linguistic patterns and cultural traits. In fact, I know one story of a Cherokee man who was in Jerusalem, and the Jews there he was talking to, when he pronounced the name of God in their language, they were amazed because that's the name they don't pronounce, and the way they don't pronounce it, because it is so holy.
Yeah.
But it's all over the world.
Yep.
No,
it is.
and the reason I wanted to bring up this about the lost book and the possibility, and I realize it's conjecture, but it's a good hypothesis. The dog ate my book. Well, if it's the Emperor Qin Shi Huang of the Qin dynasty in 213 BC, and he has done this despicable thing, and therefore he's referred to culturally now, 2,000 years later, as a dog, or at least that's how he appears in the story. Well, here's what clicked with me. The People's Republic of China, again, the one China policy has for the last 70 years consistently gone about obliterating ancestral records and histories like this, cultural identity markers. And it seems to me, when I read this, what you put in your paper about the lost book, it seems to me that's been a constant thing in China and probably around the world. And it's, if there is any central orchestration of such a thing, I would say it would be our adversary, who does not want to see God's people reassembled. And that's why,
And as my friend Jane Hilliard would say, nice try, but.
Yes, nice try, but. Which, okay, this is a good place to transition into the new initiative that you would like to talk about, the 10 in 10.
Yeah.
What is that?
Okay, so my initiative, which is why I'm on your podcast, and how we're going for time. Oh, I've probably used up most of the time already.
We're good.
With my stories. I love the stories because the stories just glorify God, and that this is a really important topic for him. But I've got now four Mizos who want to go across the Silk Road, because we're going to skip China for obvious reasons, which we've just talked about. But what we want to do is retrace our steps. We literally want to do the Jeremiah 31:21 verse, that commanded Israel to set up way. And it's really, and if you look at the context, it's Ephraim it's being talked to.
Yes.
It's, is Ephraim my dear son? Okay. It's in that context. We're talking about the 10 tribes. Okay. And so in that context, they're told to set up waymarks and come back the way that you went. And so that's what we want to do. We want to actually, because we've already found some of these markers, linguistics, cultural, maybe some physical markers. So we've already found some because we've already been to Kyrgyzstan once. And so we found that little phrase. And of course, their ancestor is Manass, the Mizos is Manasseh. It's not a hard leap to say it's probably the same name. And, and of course, the people in Kyrgyzstan they also have a lost book, and their lost book, it's the Kitai Khan, which means the king of North China burnt their book. They actually have, that's how they put it. They've probably got the most accurate translation of all of the books, of all of the stories of this lost book. The king of North China burnt their book and wanted to put them into oblivion, because now they didn't have their laws to live by. I think it goes something like that. But we've been to Kyrgyzstan. So what we're going to do is we're going to start in Kyrgyzstan, probably go a little bit to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and then we're going to cross the Caspian Sea into Azerbaijan, and then into that region of, the Caucasus Mountains around Georgia, which is where we all know that around the Black Sea, where Israel was taken captivity to. And then we're going to go to Turkey and then fly over to Israel for Sukkot. And so we're hoping to do that next year. And we're hoping that 3 other teams would want to join us, not traveling with us, but retracing their steps. And I think I've got a team from Korea that want to do theirs. Okay. They might think that they've come around the sea as well from India, maybe. So, they might want to go back that way. I'm not sure, but it's up to them. Whatever way they think they came to that part of the world, and that they retrace their steps back. And, what we want to do is, video our evidence, put it up on a blog site, and so that many other people can see, our journey and our retracing our steps with the mind to say, here are cultural markers, like way markers, signposts to these people were here, 2,000 years ago, whatever. And so, even though we're, thousands of kilometers and, thousands of years from this site, we've still got the same cultural things going on. And so that's the idea. And so next year we're going to call Year Zero. It's our pilot scheme, so, and the teams that go with me are, they're going to be the diehards from, the Lost Tribes and the Reunion people. So what I want to then do from 2025 to 2034, so that'll be the following, not next year, but the following 10 years, that I want to have an ever increasing lot of teams retracing their steps during summer and then ending up in Israel for Sukkot. So that's the idea, that, we pilot it, we sort of work out the issues and the problems next year, and then we put it forward in 2025 as year one, and that, that we sort of start a movement, sort of a little bit like, people making pilgrimages to Israel, but instead of just we want to go and retrace the steps of Jesus or whatever, or we want to go to the Holy Land, that we're actually doing it with this purpose of awakening the world to how widespread the 10 tribes of Israel went across the world, and that there are people that know that they're related as family all across cultures, all across nations, all across languages. And that's a very unifying thing. Even if you're not religious in any way, the fact that we would want to bring a unifying story of all mankind probably being related to each other, I think has to be a really good thing in and of itself. So I think it'll get widespread support as we put out the promotions, and we'll probably do a video of next year's trips so that we've got a little documentary that people can watch, and especially once it gets to Israel and you get a bit of news from living in Israel. And our idea is that we take our traditional temporary dwellings with us, or get them flown there probably ahead of us, so that when we go to Sukkot, we actually live in, like, for example, if you're from Kyrgyzstan, you're living in a yurt. If you're from Mizoram, you've probably set up a bamboo hut, one of the traditional ones they put on their fields to, get out of the shade during the, the sun, the midday sun. And so that's the idea. And I'm calling it 10 in 10. So it's the retracing of the 10 tribes over a period of 10 years. And then I'm hoping at the end of the 10 years, there's a widespread acknowledgement that God's really bringing the tribes back together. So, so you'll have people from Ireland, people from Wales, people from Northern Europe. Everybody will be doing a different journey, but, and we don't, there's no rules. People don't need to, run it past, anybody. It'll be just whatever their little team thinks is their research is showing them. Yeah.
Well, why not? The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has been doing this for years, with calling people to Sukkot for the Parade of Nations, but not in the sense of the tribes returning.
No, they haven't done that.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm envisioning, we could, some documentary miniseries. That would be really awesome. Season 1 of the 10 and 10, season 5. Yeah. And following people all the way from, Nigeria, South Africa, from everywhere.
Everybody's got a smartphone with a good camera on it now. You can upload it to the internet in no time, and and then you put a little documentary of all of those little videos together and just show how widespread this awakening is.
Absolutely. Now, the people who will be going with you and those you'll be encountering, they're not all Christians, though. And that might be a question that the audience might have. This is not strictly an awakening among those who profess to follow Jesus Christ or Yeshua the Messiah. It crosses religious boundaries. That kind of blows my mind here. So how does that happen?
There's I don't talk very publicly about the time that I went to Kashmir, but I literally did a Passover in a hotel in Kashmir, and all of the people that came were Muslims. And the old professor who I'd met, I think he was in his 90s. The young man who was supposed to bring him failed to pick him up. Well, they knocked on the door. He didn't answer, so they thought, oh, he's too old. He doesn't want to come, and left him there. And so when he realized that he hadn't, he wasn't being picked up, he put himself in a taxi and came to my little Passover, which was the other side of the lake. Well, this man was a Sufi mystic, which means like he's a Muslim Sufi, yeah.
Yes, but I studied a little Sufism, so I understand where you're coming from. He's very mystical, very devoted.
Very mystical. And so he had been the head of Central Asian Studies at Kashmir University, and he had spent 20 years using the resources of the university to look at the migrations of Israel into Kashmir. 20 years. He'd spent 20 years doing that. And so I met him in 2015. I met him again in 2016. Both times he suggested I do something with the University of the Kashmir, which I ended up having, what's the word? A memorandum of understanding that they wanted to, do that, maybe not overtly, but they wanted to have migrations through Central Asia conference with that as being part of what they were looking at. Both times I went to do that, India and Pakistan blew up over the border in Kashmir, so both times that went into curfew, and so that didn't happen. But I wrote a paper for their journal, which is up on the academia.org, and then that translated into me going to Kyrgyzstan to speak at the conference in Bishkek. So if I hadn't done those things, but I've still got a young man there who's I think he's got his doctorate now, and I'll probably try and get him over to Japan at some stage to meet the Japanese. Well, he's a Muslim. He's very religious. He's a lovely, lovely man. But all of these people definitely think they're part of the lost tribes of Israel. It's sort of like, and this is what he said to me one day. I was sitting across from his office, and he said to me, do you think if I went to Israel, it would be safe? This is what he said to me. He's got one of those Muslim beards that look, the first time I saw him, I went, we're all dead, that's how he looked. Okay. Because, very typical of a very religious Muslim. Anyway, so he's asking, and I said, there's lots of Muslims in Israel. He says, I don't want to go to the Muslims in Israel. He says, I want to go to the Orthodox Jews. Do you think I'd be safe? This is his question. So he's still young. I'm still hoping that one day I can fulfill his dream of going to Israel and meeting the Orthodox Jews over there.
Well, we'll pray toward that, because I think there might be some receptivity to meeting him among the Jews of Orthodox Jews of Israel. It seems that, and the reason I asked this about the various religious backgrounds is our Messiah is reassembling his nation, and they were scattered literally into every nation, every corner of the earth, every ethnic group, every religion. So we're about to have some more paradigms overturned.
Yeah, Richard Hewitt and I talk about this all the time, that it's going to look so different.
Yes.
we're just gonna have to keep our hearts open and our hands off everything. That's how we sort of think about it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, so once again, that's the 10 in 10 initiative. 2023, that's year zero. Or is it 2024 is year zero?
2024 is year zero. So if, like, for example, if there's some people in North America want to do something, like, even if you want to start in, what's your background, Scottish?
Yes.
Yeah. So even if you want to go to Scotland, start from Scotland, and go across to whichever way you think you came, and then end up in Turkey, and then Israel, or just go fly into Israel for Sukkot. If you want to do that,
My brother and
feel
I have
free.
been talking about going back to Scotland and tracing our roots. So maybe I could just twist his arm a little bit and we'll keep going.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the idea. And I won't be doing that next year, but because my roots are Scottish and Welsh, and so I'll probably, one of those later years, probably fly into Scotland and do retracing my roots from Scotland and back into Israel that way. So but not so next year I'm sort of helping the Mizos travel, so that they don't have a lot of money, and so if they travel with me, I can sort of bail them out at different points.
Well, the Lord bless you for this, for taking that position and helping our sisters and brothers from Mizoram to retrace their steps. Now, if anyone is interested and wants to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Well, the easiest way is my email, losttribesfound, just all one word, losttribesfound at bigpond.com.
Losttribesfound at bigpond.com. All right. Well, Margot Crossing of Woiwoi, Australia, and of Mizoram in Northeast India, and of wherever it is that the 10 tribes have been scattered, thank you so much for sharing your heart with us. This is exciting news, and I pray that the Lord's blessing go before you in this 10 in 10 initiative.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Al.